She was fired mid-question, in front of 600 people, over salad. No one clapped, no one breathed, but the CEO's mic was still on. They tried to erase her from the company. Instead, she erased the company's credibility. All she did was ask about one missing file, and found an entire offshore fraud underneath it. My name is Harper Quinn. Until 3 months ago, I was the head of compliance analytics at Coworker Energy Group, a renewable energy investment firm that was the darling of Wall Street's sustainability portfolios. I spent 5 years building my career there, believing in our mission to fund the future of clean energy. I believed in the numbers, the impact reports, the glossy sustainability commitments. Until I didn't. I should start with that day. The annual shareholders meeting at the Fairmont in Denver. I was wearing my navy blue suit, the one I'd bought specifically for presentations to the board, with a silk blouse that cost more than I'd ever spent on a single item of clothing. Professional armor. I'd rehearsed my question 3 times in the bathroom mirror that morning. Not because it was complicated, but because I knew it mattered. The grand ballroom was packed with investors, board members, and senior staff. White linen tablecloths, crystal water glasses, and the distinct smell of wealth, subtle cologne, leather portfolios, and the electric anticipation of money in motion. CEO Damian Knox was 30 minutes into his presentation on our unprecedented growth in verified carbon offset investments. His voice filled the room with practiced confidence, slides transitioning seamlessly behind him, showing upward trending graphs in Coworker green. I waited for the Q&A portion. When they brought the microphones around, I raised my hand. The young assistant with the wireless mic made her way to my table. And next, we have a question from Harper Quinn, our head of compliance analytics, announced the moderator. I stood, straightened my jacket. Thank you, Damian, for the comprehensive presentation. I have a question regarding the Q4 environmental audit report from last year. It appears to be missing from our legal filings. Could you address the status of this document and why it wasn't included in the materials provided to the board? The room didn't exactly go silent. It was already quiet for the Q&A, but something in the quality of the silence changed. A tensing. I noticed Damian's CFO, Victor Mercer, lean over and whisper something. Damian's smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed just slightly. Harper, he said, his voice smooth as polished granite. Thank you for your question. Actually, this gives me an opportunity to make an announcement I was planning to address later. He straightened his tie, an unnecessary gesture for someone whose appearance was always immaculate. It was a tell. I'd seen it in board meetings when he was buying time. Effective immediately, Harper Quinn is no longer with Coworker Energy Group. The fork someone had been using to eat their salad clattered against a plate somewhere to my right. I felt the blood drain from my face. We wish her the best in her future endeavors. Damian continued, his smile never wavering. Now, regarding upcoming environmental assessments, I'm pleased to announce we've engaged Firm Step Auditing to provide comprehensive third-party verification of our carbon offset portfolio. He continued speaking, but the words blurred together. 600 pairs of eyes were either fixed on me or deliberately avoiding looking at me. I stood frozen, microphone still in my hand, until the assistant gently took it back. I gathered my belongings with mechanical precision, slid my chair back, and walked back straight, chin up toward the exit. Every step echoed. The entire journey from my table to the door felt like crossing the Arctic on foot. No one stopped me. No one spoke. My colleagues, people I'd worked alongside for years, suddenly became intensely interested in their dessert forks. In the elevator, I watched my company email account disappear from my phone in real time. By the time I reached the lobby, my security access had been revoked. 5 years of my professional life, erased in the time it took to descend 18 floors. I made it to my car before the trembling started. The first 24 hours after being publicly executed are surprisingly mundane. I drove home on autopilot, fed my cat, Archimedes, opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. This certainly qualified, though not in the way I'd imagined. I sat on my balcony overlooking downtown Denver, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks that would have made a perfect backdrop for Cadralis's sustainability brochures. I didn't cry. I was too shocked, too furious for tears. Instead, I methodically typed out a timeline of events, starting 6 weeks earlier when I'd first noticed the missing audit report while preparing materials for this very shareholders' meeting. The report had existed, I'd reviewed it myself. It contained our quarterly verification of carbon offset projects, emissions calculations, and third-party validations. Standard procedure. Except it had vanished from our record system. When I'd asked about it through official channels, I'd received vague responses about consolidation of documentation and streamlining reporting procedures. Red flags, all of them, but not enough to explain being fired in front of the entire company and its major investors. My phone buzzed with messages from shocked colleagues. Most expressed disbelief. A few offered condolences, none offered explanations. My former assistant, Morgan, texted, "What the actual hell happened? Everyone's in shock. Damien called an emergency leadership meeting after you left." I didn't respond to any messages that night. What could I say? I didn't know what had happened myself. At 2:19 a.m., when sleep remained elusive, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize, Quantum 7th Shade, Proton Mail. Com. The subject line read simply, "You're not crazy." The body of the email contained 2 sentences. "I know about the report you mentioned. You're not the only one who noticed." No signature, no identifying information. But it was enough to transform my anger from a wildfire into something more focused, more dangerous. Someone else knew. Someone else had noticed. I replied with one line, "How can I verify you're not just messing with me?" The response came 8 minutes later. Check the metadata on the AgroClear carbon offset verification. Compare against what was submitted to the board. AgroClear was our largest agricultural carbon sequestration project, a massive initiative involving paying farmers to implement regenerative practices. It represented nearly 40% of our offset portfolio. I couldn't access company files anymore, but I still had my old backup drive from when I transferred departments 2 years ago, moving from legal to compliance. I'd kept it as a professional insurance policy, a habit from my early days working at a law firm where documentation was sacred. I connected the drive and spent the next hour combing through files until I found what I was looking for, the original AgroClear verification documents. It took another hour of comparing dates, figures, and certification timestamps. But eventually, I found the discrepancy. The report submitted to the board claimed verification of 4.2 million tons of carbon sequestration. The original audit showed 1.8 million tons. Someone had altered the numbers by 2.4 million tons. At current carbon credit prices, that difference represented over $300 million in value that didn't actually exist. I sat back in my chair, the blue light of my screen illuminating my face in the dark apartment. This wasn't just an administrative error or a reporting inconsistency. This was fraud. Deliberate, calculated, massive fraud. And I had just publicly asked about the document that could prove it. By morning, I'd received another message from my anonymous contact. "They're going to come after you. Prepare yourself." I didn't have to wait long to find out what that meant. By noon, my phone was buzzing constantly. Former colleagues reported that HR was conducting wellness checks with anyone who'd worked closely with me, asking questions about my recent behavior, whether I'd seemed unstable or under unusual stress. They were constructing a narrative, creating retroactive justification for my firing, making it about my mental health rather than the question I'd asked. Omar from logistics, someone I'd barely interacted with, sent me a text. "Just got out of a weird meeting with HR. They asked if you'd ever mentioned financial concerns or seemed paranoid about company reporting. What's going on?" I didn't respond, but I saved the message. Then I started saving everything: screenshots of texts, emails, the original audit reports from my backup drive. I created a folder on an encrypted external hard drive and titled it, "If I Fall, You Fall First." The next day, LinkedIn notified me that Cadralis had already posted my position. The job description included new language about maintaining team harmony and supporting established reporting protocols. The message was clear: my replacement would be someone who wouldn't ask uncomfortable questions. I spent the day updating my resume mechanically, going through the motions of someone who'd been unexpectedly terminated and was preparing to re-enter the job market. In reality, I was buying time, trying to figure out my next move. That evening, another email arrived from Quantum 7 Shade. Check your mailbox, actual mailbox. I found a USB drive in a padded envelope with no return address. Inside was a folder labeled simply AgroClear Q4 Phantom Offsets. The files detailed how Cadralis had been recording carbon offsets that didn't exist, agricultural projects that had failed to implement the required practices or had grossly overstated their carbon sequestration potential. The email that came an hour later was from a different address, Jillian Moreno, 83@gmail.com. Harper. I used to work in the audit department. I was let go 6 months ago after raising concerns about verification procedures. The way they're talking about you now is exactly what they did to me, questioning your stability, your judgment. Don't let them gaslight you. I've sent you what I managed to save before they escorted me out. Be careful, Jillian. I'd never met Jillian Moreno. I searched her name and found her LinkedIn profile. She'd been an environmental audit specialist at Cadralis for 3 years, before abruptly moving to a smaller firm in Chicago. Her profile didn't mention any issues at Cadralis. Her recommendation section included a generic positive note from Victor Mercer, the CFO who'd whispered to Damien right before I was fired. The pieces were falling into place. I wasn't the first person to notice discrepancies. I was just the one unfortunate enough to ask about them publicly. The next morning, I created a secure email account and reached out to Jillian. Her response was immediate and included her phone number. We spoke for over an hour. They'll try to isolate you, she warned. Make you question yourself. Make others question you. It's textbook. When I left, they had everyone believing I was having personal problems that affected my work. Why didn't you fight back? I asked. Her laugh was hollow. With what resources against their legal team, I had bills to pay, a career to salvage. They offered a severance package with an NDA. I took it. But you're talking to me now. Let's just say I've had second thoughts about that decision, especially after seeing what happened to you. Do you know what's really going on with the AgroClear numbers? It's bigger than AgroClear, she said. It's systematic. The carbon credits, the offset verifications, the environmental impact assessments, they're all being manipulated. But I couldn't prove it was coming from the top until I saw what happened to you. Nobody fires their head of compliance publicly unless they're terrified of what she might find. After we hung up, I received an email from her containing 3 more files, financial details showing international money transfers through a complex network of subsidiaries, private jet usage data disguised as vendor relations budget, a detailed plan for artificial inflation of carbon credits to boost quarterly profits. The last file was dated just 2 weeks before the shareholders' meeting. It included comments from both Damien and Victor discussing how to reshape the narrative around verification results. I finally had what I needed. Not just suspicions or isolated discrepancies, but documented evidence of systematic fraud. The question was what to do with it. For 3 days, I did nothing with the information. Not because I was hesitating, but because I was planning. Corporate retaliation is a dangerous game. I needed to be methodical. Meanwhile, Cadralis was busy rewriting history. My former colleague Emma called to tell me they'd sent a company-wide email explaining my departure was due to ongoing performance concerns, a complete fabrication given my consistently excellent reviews. No one's buying it, Emma assured me. Everyone saw how it went down. People are talking. Harper, they're scared, but they're talking. I asked her to forward me the email, which she did immediately. Another piece for my documentation. On day 4, I received a formal letter from Cadralis' legal department reminding me of my confidentiality obligations and warning against disparagement. The letter mentioned potential legal action should I misrepresent company operations or disclose proprietary information. It was expected, but still infuriating. They were threatening me after firing me for asking a legitimate question. That night, I made my first move. Using a burner email account, I sent a document titled Shareholder Packet 01 to a carefully selected list of Cadralis's major investors. The subject line read, Request for immediate review irregular offshore transactions. The packet contained only factual information, the discrepancies between reported and actual carbon offset verifications, the timing of document removals from the system, and the international money flows. No accusations, no emotional language. Just data, with sources clearly cited. I included a final page that simply stated, the Q4 environmental audit report referenced at the shareholders' meeting would answer many questions raised by this information. Its absence from official filings warrants explanation. The response was faster than I'd anticipated. By mid-morning the next day, my phone was buzzing with texts from former colleagues. Holy shit, have you seen the internal Slack channel's total meltdown? Who authorized the old server to still be running? Who sent that packet? Emergency board call scheduled for 2 p.m. Damien looks like he's seen a ghost. I hadn't included my name on the packet, but it wouldn't take them long to connect the dots. I didn't care. The information was out now, in the hands of people with the power to demand answers. By evening, the story had evolved. Russell Train, representing Cadralis's largest institutional investor, had called an emergency session with the board of directors. According to my sources still inside the company, he'd walked into the meeting with a single sheet of paper and placed it on the table. The paper contained one question. Explain why the Q4 environmental audit report from last year is not included in the financial materials presented to the board. My exact question, the one that had gotten me fired. Except when Russell Train asked it, backed by 28% of the company's voting shares, the response was very different. The board voted to immediately suspend Damian Knox and Victor Mercer pending a full investigation, freezing their executive authority. The company's stock dropped 12% in after-hours trading. I felt no satisfaction, no vindication, only clarity. My question hadn't just been valid, it had been the thread that, when pulled, was now unraveling the entire fabric of deception they'd woven. The next 72 hours brought a flurry of developments. Cadralis announced an independent investigation. The board appointed an interim CEO. Former employees began reaching out to me, sharing their own experiences of being silenced when they'd raised concerns. My anonymous contact sent one final message. Well done. Watch for their countermove. It came in the form of a carefully worded press release suggesting that the alleged discrepancies were likely the result of misunderstandings regarding complex carbon accounting methodologies. The statement implied that the investigation would clear the suspended executives once these technical nuances were properly explained. They were attempting to frame this as a misunderstanding rather than fraud. To paint whistleblowers like me and Jillian as people who simply didn't comprehend the sophisticated nature of carbon markets, it was time for my final move. I compiled one last document, the most damning evidence I'd been holding back. A direct money trail linking Cadralis funds to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. The transactions were authorized by both Damien and Victor, with no legitimate business purpose documented. This time, I didn't send it to investors. I posted it anonymously on a financial transparency forum, with no commentary, no accusations, just the raw data. Within hours, it had been picked up by Reddit's r/corporate malfeasance community, then spread to LinkedIn, where finance and sustainability professionals began dissecting it in detailed threads. The hashtag Dear Harper Was Right started trending in financial circles. By nightfall, 3 major financial news outlets had picked up the story. By morning, the SEC had announced a formal investigation into Cadralis's reporting practices. Damien and Victor were no longer just suspended, they were officially terminated for cause. The company's stock had fallen another 18%. I watched it all unfold from my apartment, still unemployed, still officially the person who'd been fired for asking an inconvenient question. But now the world knew the question had been the right one to ask. A week later, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It was Russell Train himself. Ms. Quinn, he said, his voice carrying the distinct authority of someone who manages billions in assets. I believe we have some matters to discuss. We met at a quiet restaurant downtown, the kind with private booths and staff who excel at discretion. Train was older than I'd expected, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to evaluate everything in terms of risk and return. What happened to you at the shareholders' meeting was unconscionable, he said after we'd ordered, but illuminating. The board has pieced together what's been happening. The fraud goes back at least 2 years. Phantom carbon offsets, manipulated verification data, offshore accounts. He took a sip of water. The damage to the company's reputation is severe. The financial impact will be worse, but the board is committed to a complete reset, transparency, accountability. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. The board would like to offer you a position, he said. Head of the new independent ethics committee, reporting directly to shareholders, complete autonomy, authority to review any document, question any executive. Your experience in both legal and compliance makes you uniquely qualified. The irony wasn't lost on me. You want to hire back the person you just fired in front of everyone. The board wants to hire the person who had the courage to ask the right question, even knowing what it might cost her. The shareholders deserve nothing less. I considered his offer. It was tempting, the vindication, the authority, the chance to rebuild something honest from the ruins of deception. I'll need time to think about it, I said. Train nodded. Of course. But don't take too long. The announcement of the new ethics committee goes out next week. We'd like your name on it. As I drove home, I reflected on the whirlwind of the past month. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. My original question hadn't just been valid, it had ripped away the facade covering a multi-million-dollar fraud. Sometimes, the right question is the most dangerous thing you can ask. I accepted the position, not for vindication or career advancement, but because systems only change when someone insists on accountability. The first day I walked back into Cadralis headquarters, this time with expanded authority and the explicit backing of the board, the atmosphere was radically different. Gone was the sleek veneer of corporate infallibility. In its place was a tentative humility, a recognition that the company's reputation now hung by a thread. My new office wasn't the glass-walled space I'd previously occupied on the executive floor. Instead, I chose a more modest room on a lower floor, closer to where most employees worked. I wanted accessibility over status. The ethics committee I was building needed to be approachable, not remote. On my desk that first morning was a handwritten note from Russell Train. Fix what's broken, we'll back you. The task ahead was monumental. The external investigation had revealed that the fraud extended beyond what even I had uncovered. The phantom carbon offsets were just the visible part of a complex scheme involving multiple executives, third-party verifiers who had been compromised, and a network of shell companies designed to hide both the financial flows and the actual performance of key projects. My first action was to establish a secure anonymous reporting system for employees to share concerns without fear of retaliation. My second was to begin a comprehensive review of every major carbon offset project in our portfolio. Within weeks, the culture began to shift. People who had been silent started speaking up. Documentation that had been buried began surfacing. The full extent of the deception became clearer and more disturbing. Damien and Victor hadn't acted alone. There were mid-level managers who had facilitated the fraud, technical experts who had manipulated data, finance staff who had processed questionable transactions. Some had been willing participants, motivated by bonuses tied to performance metrics. Others had been coerced through threats to their careers or immigration status. I worked 16-hour days, sleeping on the office couch some nights. This wasn't just about exposing wrongdoing anymore, it was about rebuilding from the foundation, creating systems that would make such fraud impossible in the future, restoring integrity to a company whose entire purpose was supposed to be environmental stewardship. 3 months after my public firing, I stood in front of the company's employees, many of the same people who had watched me walk out of that ballroom in humiliation, and presented the new ethics and transparency framework. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but neither was the opportunity for genuine change. What happened at Cadralis wasn't just a financial fraud. I told them. It was a betrayal of trust. The trust of our investors, our partners, and most importantly, the trust of all of you who came to work every day believing in our mission. We can't change the past, but we can ensure that the future of this company is built on honesty, transparency, and genuine environmental impact. After the presentation, Emma caught up with me in the hallway. You know, she said with a wry smile, when they fired you that day, I never imagined you'd end up basically running the place. I shook my head. I don't run the place. I just make sure the people who do are held accountable. Same difference, she replied. Everyone knows the board won't make a move without your sign-off now. You've got more real power than Damien ever had. Maybe she was right. But power had never been my goal. Integrity had. When I'd stood up at that shareholders' meeting with my simple question about a missing audit report, I hadn't been seeking to bring down a CEO or expose a massive fraud. I just wanted an answer to something that didn't make sense. That evening, I sat in my office reviewing documents for the upcoming board meeting. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Damian Knox and Victor Mercer had been formally charged with securities fraud, wire fraud, and multiple counts of filing false statements. They faced decades in prison if convicted on all counts. I felt no satisfaction, no sense of revenge fulfilled. What I felt was a deep sadness that people so talented, so well-positioned to make a positive difference in the world, had instead chosen deception for profit. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. It was Jillian Moreno, recently rehired to head our revamped audit department. You're working too late again, she said, leaning against the door frame. I smiled. Look who's talking. Fair point. She entered and sat across from me. I just got the final verification results for the actual carbon impact of our project portfolio. Once you strip away all the fake numbers and inflated claims, we're actually still making a difference. Not as much as we claimed, but real progress. Genuine carbon sequestration. Actual renewable energy deployment. It was the first genuinely good news I'd heard in months. So there's something worth saving here after all. Thanks to you, she said. If you hadn't asked that question, I waved away her praise. If I hadn't, someone else would have eventually. The truth has a way of surfacing. Maybe, she said, unconvinced. But it surfaces a lot faster when someone has the courage to ask the right question at the right time. After she left, I stood at my window looking out at the Denver skyline, lights twinkling against the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Damian Knox was probably meeting with high-priced attorneys, planning his defense. Victor Mercer might be negotiating a plea deal. Former colleagues who had participated in the fraud were cooperating with investigators, trying to minimize their own culpability. And here I was, back in the company that had tried to destroy me, working to rebuild it into something worthy of the mission it claimed to serve. Life takes unexpected turns. 3 months ago, I'd been publicly humiliated, my career seemingly in ruins. Now I was leading the transformation of the very organization that had discarded me. All because I'd asked about one missing file and found an entire offshore fraud underneath it. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do is ask a simple question. And sometimes, that's exactly what needs to be done. My name is Harper Quinn. I was fired mid-question, in front of 600 people, over salad. They tried to erase me from the company. Instead, I erased their lies and helped build something honest in their place. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about truth and how hard some people will work to hide it, and how necessary it is that others keep asking the questions that matter, no matter the cost. The truth doesn't always win, but when it does, it changes everything.